What's up, everyone? We are your internet historians, and we're back for another episode today. And also, Lisa is back for another episode today. Yay!
Hey.
So in today's episode, we are going to be talking about the history behind the movie The Big Short. In 2008, Wall Street guru Michael Burry realizes that a number of subprime home loans are in danger of defaulting. Burry bets against the housing market by throwing more than $1 billion of his investors' money into credit default swaps. His actions attract the attention of banker Jared Vennett, hedge fund specialist Mark Baum, and other greedy opportunists. Together, these men make a fortune by taking full advantage of the impending economic collapse in America. So what'd you guys think? I mean,
I liked it.
I liked it. It was, we've said it too before already, but I liked the way, I don't know, like style, I guess, that they chose to film. And I
Same.
don't know, I thought it was really cool how they broke the fourth wall. And I just think, yeah, the concepts are a little obviously hard to understand, even though they were trying to explain it within the film. I still had to pause it, talk to my husband about it, and then also Google it still. And then I was still confused because he didn't know anything. And then the internet doesn't really seem to be helping me either. But I liked it.
Yeah, this was my second time watching the film, and it's not like I watched it too far apart. The first time I probably watched it was like, I don't know, 6 months ago. I'm still
Oh, really?
confused. Wow. So the first time I really had a hard time following it. And then this time, the only reason why I maybe had an easier time. Okay, let me just say that the first time my expectations were that all the characters like related to each other in some way or connected in some way. So that's why I was like so confused majority of the time, because I was like, wait, like we're hopping back to him. We're hopping back to Christian Bale. I don't get it. Is he talking to, Steve Carell? Like what? So now I know that there's just like separate groups of people, and that helped me. And then, I just had a little more knowledge of what was going on. Because again, I went in not knowing anything about the film. That's why I think I was really confused most of the time. Even I'm still confused. I understood it a little bit better.
No, yeah, I think going into it as well, I thought all the characters were gonna eventually like overlap with each other, or I don't know, be connected in some way, but they weren't. Except I guess the one dude, Bennett, they all basically stumbled across Burry's stuff or whatever, somehow got wind of whatever he was doing, and then they all did their own thing. So I guess that's the only way they were connected. But I don't know. I thought they were all gonna like cross paths at some point in the film, but
yeah, I liked it. Like you said, I liked the style that they used for, explaining things and just keeping it interesting, because I feel like while I think we're all still confused on like a lot of aspects of what happened and how it happened, I feel like it kind of helped a little bit the way that they because they brought in Margot Robbie and Anthony Bourdain and Selena Gomez to explain the basic concepts. And I feel like that kind of helped. Even I feel like the most helpful part was probably the Jenga example that he used. At least you're no. But I also just like Adam McKay as a writer and a director. He works with Will Ferrell a lot, and I just really like his writing and his movies. So
yeah,
it was entertaining.
I was gonna say, oh yeah, I feel like if they didn't film it in the way that they did, it would have made it more difficult to understand and not as I think they were trying to basically make something hella boring like stock market stuff, like entertaining. And I think they did a successful job at that because I was in it. I was like, oh my God, this movie is like actually a lot. I don't know. I also, for some reason, had the idea that it wasn't going to be that great of a movie for some reason. I don't know where that idea in my head came from. I think maybe just because I knew it was about stock market stuff. So I was like, this is not going to be good. And then I left like, oh my God, that was a good movie.
I don't know why, but if Ryan Gosling is in the movie, I expect it to be good, because I feel like he doesn't take a lot of roles. He's very specific in what he wants, but that's just me. But for me, I feel like I need like I said earlier, with you guys. I need like a movie where they explain it like I'm 5.
Yeah.
And actually, like not too long ago, of course, because we all know the GameStop stuff happened recently. And when that did happen, I was talking because Luis actually started getting into stocks, and I was like, okay,
Did you guys buy GameStop stock?
No, it was so dumb because he
Oh,
actually
man.
knew. Yeah, I know, right? He knew about it, but obviously, what the intel was through Reddit, and you never know with Reddit, right? So that's why
Yeah.
he didn't really trust the source. But he has been kind of like researching stock and stuff like that and trying to get it. And so I was like, okay, let's have a sit down discussion where I can interrupt you and ask you questions. Cause at my job, I've had conversations with people about stock and I'll just smile and nod, but really like in my head, I'm already lost. I don't know what's going on. And I don't know them well enough where I feel comfortable enough to like stop them, wherever they are and be like, I need you to like go back and explain this and that. It's just embarrassed.
Yeah.
I feel embarrassed, honestly, because it's like I feel like I should know. And the way they talk about it is like as if I know. Like I don't know. And then I also feel like I don't want to ask too many questions because I feel annoying. So we had a moment where like Luis would be like, going on with the flow, and I'd be like, and the thing is, I think with stock as well is that there's a lot of different terms and that can kind of get confusing, like we see here with like bonds and shares and stocks and investments, and you're like, okay, they all sound the same to me. And then there's like I didn't really understand a lot of things, and that I really wanted to get into a moment where I could just like stop someone and be like, okay, like now explain this thing, this small thing that's got me off guard. Of course, Luis is no expert and he just did his best to explain what he could. But yeah, like that's kind of what I needed in this movie.
Yeah.
Because I felt like they tried to do that with like Selena and stuff like that, but then even when Selena was talking, I was like, wait, Selena, stop.
You're like, even
Slow down,
slower
Selena.
than that.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like the scene with the Selena Gomez one actually made me feel like I understood a little bit more than what the other scenes were talking about too, though. Just because like the whole like side betting, whatever stuff.
Yes, I think the way they did hers was the best because Margot, she was just in the bathtub, and I was like, oh,
Yeah,
there was
Margot's,
a continuity error right
I
there.
have no idea what you're talking about. But like they said, too, even in the film, that they stock market people uses all these terms and stuff to confuse people on purpose. So like only they can be in it, so they can get all the money, basically.
Just a note and a little cool tidbit that this movie was based off of the 2010 book by author Michael Lewis, who also wrote The Blind Side, which we just did.
What?
So,
That's crazy. I didn't even know.
yeah,
I knew it was based off a book, but I didn't put the connection that they were the same person.
Yeah, apparently this guy writes about like I was gonna say a lot of financial stuff, but then I guess The Blind Side isn't.
Wait, but
I don't
didn't
know,
he
like
do
the
another book
concepts of things.
too?
Yeah, he also, I was about to say, yeah, he also did Moneyball,
Okay,
which
yeah, okay.
stars Brad Pitt as well. So look at this guy. He's got all the
He's
good
just
books.
reporting on all the stories.
Yeah, really though.
I'm gonna do my best, talk about the people, like just the main peeps. But if I'm being honest, the movie does a pretty good job of portraying the people. So first we got Michael Burry. Michael was played by Christian Bale. He was a little strange and I think hard for the general audience to fully understand and relate to him. And that's because in real life, Michael is a little off. His son was diagnosed with sorry, that sounds mean. I don't mean it like that. I just think that like they wanted to capture that his social skills are different than maybe what we're accustomed to, and especially in movies. So his son was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, and Michael believes that he also has Asperger's syndrome after reading about the disorder. And I guess, yeah, so for anyone who doesn't know what Asperger's is, it's just they just have a harder time with social interactions. And they did bring that up a little bit because Christian said something like, I don't know how to be sarcastic. And that's like a social cue, right? Like social interaction that somebody without Asperger's are able to like catch on, but somebody with Asperger's, they don't realize you're being sarcastic. So I read in this article in STMU History Media, and it was written by Haley Rodriguez. And I just think it kind of explains his involvement in this, what is this, bubble?
Yeah.
So Michael Burry was a stock investor in San Jose, California. In 2004, he immersed himself in the bond market for the first time. He became an expert on how money was borrowed and lent in the US. This soon became an obsession of his. Burry would sit in his office alone for hours upon hours reading articles, books, and financial filings. His biggest question at the time was about how subprime mortgage bonds worked. He wanted to short subprime mortgage bonds. Burry spent months looking into these bonds and investing. He found that the pool of mortgages being issued, packed, and sold were worsening in quality. There was a higher percentage of interest-only mortgages being sold. Since 2004, the decline in lending standards was visible to anyone looking into it. However, for Burry, these standards were not just on the decline; they were already hitting rock bottom. I think in the movie, they obviously like fast forward a lot or like make things look a lot faster because in the movie it looked like he just looked at some numbers and was like, there we go. So
there it is.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we all should have been noticing. No, it's more, and also another thing I thought Michael was doing was just like scouring the internet looking for like disaster. And then he found it in real estate, which I don't think is true. I think he was already like interested in money lending, like mortgages, and he just kind of fell into it and it spiraled into what it is. So it's not like he was just like spending all day and night looking for a hole.
One thing that I read is that, or people's slight issue with this movie is that, well, one being that there were other key players that they didn't have in this movie, but I mean, it's a 2-hour movie, so to condense it, let's focus on these guys type of a thing, but also that they kind of made it seem like Christian Bale's character was the only one to notice or like know what was going on. But in reality, like at that time, there were people that were actually talking about, a housing bubble and, something is coming and starting to happen. Like I was reading some article that said that like Google searches or something about like a housing bubble, quote unquote, had like skyrocketed within the year that he looked into it. So there were like rumblings of something going on, but he was definitely the first one to like jump in and like do something about it.
They did say that, Christian Bale, like, how you'd wear like the t-shirt and shorts. I guess Michael Burry also had that work attire. And some other information is that Michael does wear an artificial eye because he lost one of his eyes to cancer when he was 2. He does have a license as a physician and continues with the educational requirements, but does not practice medicine. So he, how do I want to describe him? Because he is like one of those people that make me feel not ambitious. You know what I mean?
Oh, like he's like overachieving or something?
Yeah, like not in a bad way, just in a like he's so curious, it seems like, he like loves to be educated, which not a bad thing at all. It's just like very inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
But not for me. But also makes me feel
not
bad.
For me.
Hey, but I mean, didn't he like something I saw that he like basically got kicked out of like an operating room or something because he like wasn't paying attention. So then that's pretty much why he stopped practicing too, because he just basically wasn't really, even though he could do it and stuff, he just wasn't into it, I think is something I read.
Yeah, he fell asleep during
Yeah,
the surgery.
okay.
And
Yeah, so he just
got
wasn't
very mad.
Yeah, understandably.
That's not too surprising. He kind of just seems like his brain is like this. So, okay, so Mark Bond. This character is played by Steve Carell, and it's based off of Steve Eisman. Even though Steve's name was changed, he was very much involved with the film. He showed up on set and gave Steve Carell notes. And his name was changed to the movie because in real life, okay, so basically, I think with Michael Burry, they kind of just like did everything Michael Burry, right? But whereas like Steve Eisman was like, I don't want you to put this part of my life in the story. And so with that, since they can't make it exact, that's why they changed the name of the character, even though it is completely based off of Steve Eisman and they want it. And even Steve Eisman was involved in blah, 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 blah. So the reason why is because Steve Eisman didn't lose his brother. He actually lost his child. And it is super sad. I was like, okay. I'm like, I'm like spilling the tea. It's not, it's on Wikipedia. the way he lost his child is because the night nurse that was taking care of he basically had a newborn, and the nurse was taking care of the newborn and fell asleep on the baby and I think suffocated it or something. And
Oh
that's
my
how
gosh.
The nurse fell asleep on him?
Yes, that's what it says on Wikipedia. Like,
Did they sue the crap out of them? What the heck? That's
I
insane.
didn't want to look into it.
My
I felt
gosh.
like that was already too much information for me to know, like Steve,
like personal.
Yikes.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, like that's why, because obviously with a character like Steve and Mark, you can see how they just are fighting for justice in a way. And why would you fight for justice? Like, it doesn't make sense without a motive. And that's why they had to give Mark that motive, which is him losing his brother. And Steve also had that as well, but it wasn't his brother, it was his child. So yeah, I know it's really sad, but
Mhm.
that is what happened. And then there's Greg. So okay. So Jared, who we know is Ryan Gosling, he is based off of the guy named Greg Lipman, and it's same thing. It's like everything's the same except Greg was like, don't put my name in it. And it's like, but it's like, Greg, that's you.
And I was like, we know that's you.
Yeah, it's like Ryan changed his freaking hair color to be like you. Like, I hate that, by the way. Like, side note, why? Like,
Yeah, it's bad.
Yeah, I don't.
He was
like,
so tan too.
Yeah.
I don't like Steve's hair.
It was like the same color as.
I don't.
Yeah, Steve's was such a bad wig. Oh my god, it was so bad.
I'm like, you guys aren't actually these people. Why do you have to freaking have their hairdo? Like, I understand we're like basing it off of this guy. If we're gonna base it off, we don't have to do his like outfit too.
Yeah.
So, my opinion, obviously, but anyways, essentially the story was that Greg found out about Michael's game plan with the whole house mortgage stuff, but he didn't have any money to make any investments, which is why he called up Steve Eisman. So he basically copied and presented what he discovered from Michael to Steve and pretending like it was his own idea because he needed Steve's help because Greg didn't have any money. And Steve was like, I hate this, but I will help you. And we see in the movie that's also how Steve Carell portrayed it. They just said that he was just honest about his motives and just what was going on in the big side of things, which a lot of people really aren't on Wall Street, but he was. So yeah, I think that Ryan kind of portrayed that as well, because they had that one scene where the guy called him and was like, well, what do you get out of it? And then he said what he did. All right, Ben Hockett. So Brad Pitt played Ben Rickard. It's so funny because the first time I was like Brad Pitt, and the second time I was like, is that? I like was surprised again. I was like Brad Pitt. I'm like, duh, I've already watched this once.
Just surprise. This is a surprise Brad Pitt every time. Like in 12 Years a Slave. Surprise Brad Pitt.
I know. Actually, that's true.
He plays Ben Hockett or Ben Rickard, but his real name is Ben Hockett. And Ben is kind of Ben. He's like a recluse, kind of hard to get a hold of and not get a hold of. But I think it's just mostly like it's kind of hard to get information about him because he wants his life to be private. So they didn't really get any feedback from him about the movie. But he was a former Singapore-based JP Morgan trader who had a problem with the industry, as we saw in the movie. Apparently, where he lives now, you can't get there by car. And I'm like, how do you get there? I don't get it.
Helicopter.
Yeah. Bicycle. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm like, what?
By foot.
Okay. It's reported that it is true that he made $80 million in a pub called the Powder Monkey, but unlike the film, it was a period of 4 days, and he was in there because it was like one of the only places that had Wi-Fi in that area. He was there from 2 p.m. to 11 p.m., and none of the British drinkers in there really had a problem with him. They didn't really notice or mind that this American was in the corner, like blah, 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 blah. That's I don't. They said he was on the phone. I don't know what he.
That's how you trade stocks.
All right, and then there's Charles Ledley and Jamie Mai, which in their movie their name is Charlie Geller and then Jamie Shipley. But I mean, I never remember characters' last names anyway, so it's just Charlie and Jamie, right? So they they have Brownfield Fund, but reality, they started Cornwall Capital in a shed in Berkeley, California, and they went on to make millions by making small bets against the housing market. So it is true that they took in Ben kind of as like a advisor because he had so much knowledge and background in trading and stuff like that. So those three are connected, and it is true that these two Charlie and Jamie are like newbies because I think when they started all of this they're like 30 or in their 30s or something like that. So yeah, they're like the young ones that just were wide-eyed and ready to like get in there. But Charlie no longer works for Cornwall Capital. He left in 2009 to join a large Boston-based hedge fund, but Jamie is still the CEO.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about what the whole thing, what was up? What were these guys trying to short the other people? And yeah, this is probably might be a little rough. I tried to do it as how Lisa said, to explain it as like a 5-year-old. I found a few different things that explain it in different ways. And I'm not really going to be getting into like, the CDOs and all that stuff. I'm just going to basically talk about like what in essence, I guess the whole thing was about. What was the mortgage bubble and who is to blame for it? So, obviously, watching the film, they try to explain all these terms to the audience to try and get them to understand what's going on. And they even say that that's why bankers and investors use all these hard, such convoluted terms, as we said earlier, to try and kind of confuse the average person and to kind of make them not, I guess, want to be interested or get involved in stocks and stock market and all that stuff. And you know what? It works because even watching the film, I was like, what? I even said, like I had to stop it multiple times and had to research certain things about it. And even then, I was still a little bit confused. So, to put it in the simplest terms possible, the largest contributor to the bubble was, I guess kind of they had to set it up what happened before the mortgage bubble. So I guess there was a .com bubble, which I thought about getting into, but I was like, you know what, girl, it's okay. Let's just say that that's what it stemmed from. So it was following the .com bubble. So values in real estate began to creep up, fueling a rise in home ownership among speculative buyers, investors, and other consumers. Low interest rates relaxed lending standards, including extremely low down payment requirements, which allowed people who would otherwise never have been able to purchase a home to become homeowners. This drove home prices up even more. So, from my understanding, it was kind of like, I mean, they even kind of mentioned in the film, I think, how it's kind of like a supply and demand type of issue. There was so much demand for home ownership or like in these types of investments, I guess, that they basically had to supply it. So then they supplied the loans for the people to, I guess, be able to get it, I guess, kind of my understanding. So, but because there were so many people getting in on this, they laxed their requirements for such loans, which resulted in people not paying their loans. So I think, again, they said it in the film that they were giving all these people all these loans, but they were kind of not really looking into if these people were even going to be able to make the loans and make the payments on their loans.
Yeah, that great scene with Max Greenfield from New Girl explaining how they just how they can leave the income thing just blank. It's just like, meh, whatever, as long as I get the commission now, I don't care.
Yeah, exactly. And then at the end we see them at like a job fair.
Yep.
And yeah, it's just, and I think that was the hardest part for me to understand. It was like, I couldn't put it together. Like, what do people who are supplying these loans, like, what are they getting out of it if they're not checking to see if people are going to be able to pay them? But I think that's like one of those side things that I'm not really going to be getting into today. So I think basically, in essence, it's kind of like a whole like supply and demand thing. The demand was to have the houses, so they were trying to supply the loans for people to get these houses, but because they were trying to supply so many at one, like a short amount of time, basically they didn't have enough in order to supply people. I guess that's probably not right, but that's just how the easiest way for me to understand it is. So, who is to blame for the mortgage bubble? In the film, it definitely seems as if it's strictly on the lenders and the banks. That's what whole Mark Baum, aka Steve Eisman, aka Steve Carell. He was kind of, very against like the banks and the lenders and all that people. Like they're, obviously they even had that scene where they went to the houses to kind of, I guess, meet with the people and see if they were actually paying their loans. And you get to meet like a family who, they're saying they're paying their rent, but like, where is that money going to if not to the mortgage? So it seems like the large portion of the blame went to the lenders and the banks. But I guess this mess was kind of more of a collection of things, like just a whole bunch of different contributing factors that kind of when stacked up on one another, that's kind of what caused it. So it was the creation of the world's central banks, the homeowners, lenders, credit rating agencies, underwriters, and investors. And I'm only going to talk about the lenders and the home buyers in this one because, again, that seems kind of not to be the main things, but it's like, I don't know, because I feel like those were the two things that were kind of talked about the most. There obviously were mentions of the rating agencies and stuff like that, but I feel like these two were kind of the ones that were the most discussed in the film. So the lenders, I mean, obviously, I think we can all agree that the lenders shouldn't have lended money to people if they knew that the people in were not going to be able to afford the loan. But because the banks flooded the markets with capital liquidity, in turn lowering the interest rates, it is possible that lenders didn't see these loans as a high risk since the rates were so low. So I don't know. In some of the articles I was reading, they were like, yeah, they shouldn't have done this, but because these are such high risk or whatever. But I think because at the time to them, it might have seemed like, oh, well, these aren't high risk because all this we were getting all this money in here, so it's not that big of a deal for us to lend to someone who might not be able to afford it or might not be able to keep up with their payments. But then they also weren't checking that, so it's like, I don't know, it's just like a web of things that don't make sense.
Yeah, they kind of explained it in the movie. I mean, I feel like it kind of goes back to that Jenga scene where they have the AAA, the double B, like pretty much like the ratings of like pretty much like the risk that the lenders are taking on these mortgages and stuff. And it's pretty much, I think it was like the woman when she was talking to Michael Burry about it, where she was like, the probability of that many people defaulting on their loans and foreclosing was like so minimal at that time. They're like, that's never going to happen. All of these loans that are good will cover any of these other people who default because it's so little, it'll cover it and it's fine. Like the chances of it happening would never happen type of a thing. So,
Yeah, they did keep mentioning that throughout the entire film, like that's not going to happen. Like who doesn't pay their mortgage or who doesn't pay their loans or whatever, and it's like people who can't afford it. That's who.
yeah.
Like, duh, people who, you got to check on and make sure that they can afford it first. Now the home buyers. It is important to note that home buyers were not innocent in the equation either, even though I don't think they try to portray them as innocent, but they definitely portrayed them as the ones who were more affected in this whole scenario than anyone on in this whole equation. Obviously, most of them lost their homes and were led to believe that they could refinance their homes, which I think that's also a big factor because, yeah, they might not have been able to afford it, but the lenders and everyone made them think that, hey, you might not be able to afford it now, but like later on down the road, it's not going to be a big deal because you can refinance your home and then it won't even affect you anyway. So it's like they were kind of led into believing that they would in turn be able to afford it out at some point in time. But of course, they shouldn't have taken a risk as well, even though like it's just like one of those things like hard because like no one thought it was as big of a risk as it ended up being. And that's what kind of all caused it to happen.
Well, I feel like I mean, like you said, in the movie, they don't really put too much of the blame on home buyers because I just feel like buying a home is very much like learning how to do your taxes for the first time. It's not anything that you're taught in school. And so it's just like you really have to do your own research, or, you could be signing stuff and agreeing to stuff and you don't know what's going on. You're just like, oh, I'm getting into a home for the first time and it's great. I'm going to have a roof over my head. But it's just like at the same time, you're agreeing to terms, for 30 plus years or whatever. And I'm sure there are a lot of people that, end up losing their homes and they had no idea what they were agreeing to.
And
they were just being told you get a house.
exactly. Even in that scene where, I'm sorry, what's the guy's name from New Girl that was in that scene?
Oh, Max Greenfield.
Yeah, him.
The
Even in that scene,
realtor.
he was talking about how they target immigrants, and I forget who the other person was. But even in when I was researching, is they said that was like a true thing that they actually targeted people who didn't understand what was going on. So it's like, I don't know. It's like, yeah, you can say homeowners aren't, or the people who are buying aren't to blame because they shouldn't have taken the risk. But it's like they were also led, like, scams happen on every day. People who should have known better, but it's like you don't know better until you actually are put through that situation, and then you learn from that, and then know better, and then you teach other people to like learn better going forward.
I think the one where they wanted to show like a home buyer as like the bad guy was the landlord who took rent but didn't pay his
Yeah.
mortgage. That's
That
like
was messed up.
yeah, that's like a scam that probably did happen where like people were buying a bunch of houses, renting them out, and then not paying the mortgage for it.
I mean,
So,
yeah. I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, I know, I'm sure that happened. But speaking of like experiences with I know earlier we were talking about experiences that we remember of this crisis happening, because obviously we were like, I mean, I was a year before graduating high school when this happened. So basically the house that my grandparents have now, the people who lived in that house, they lost their home in foreclosure because of this whole market thing or whatever. And so that's how my
Oh,
grandparents were able to get that house for such a low value too, because it was like all the prices on homes when we were down at that time. And so they got it for really
Yeah.
low. And I
Oh
was just like,
my
oh my God,
God.
that's like, I remember when my grandparents told me that too. I was like, oh my God, that's so sad. Cause they had like a child with a disability and all this stuff. And I was just like, bro, that's like so sad.
dang.
Yeah.
And
But
I'm sure
that,
that happened in a lot of cases too, where
yeah.
people like swooped in and were like, all right, getting this
Yeah.
awesome deal now. And it's just like,
Exactly.
oh.
I
Well,
know, yeah. And like I didn't know anything either, but then my grandparents was like, "Oh yeah, this happened." Da, 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 da. And, like, and I'm just like, "Oh, okay, like that's cool for us." But like, damn, that sucks for that poor family. And they had a lot of kids too. I think
Hmm.
at least like four, maybe more. But I know one of them was like a young one that had like some type of disability and all this stuff. And I was like, "Oh my God,
yeah,
that's so sad."
Luis has this like way back in high school, he used to work on this guy's house, and this guy basically bought this large property which like today is worth up to like I think $7 million, and he only bought it for like a little bit or less than a million. I think it was still in the hundred thousands. Yeah, so it's like because it
Whoa.
was around that time and he just happy he had the money, and he just got lucky, as I
Mm-hmm.
guess in a way. But yeah, he had like a large piece of land, and there's actually like two houses because apparently because the way it was built is that people can have their weddings there. So like there's a house where the people live in, and then there's like an area where people can yeah have a party
Mm-hmm.
essentially. So yeah, I was just thinking when you said that the prices went down, and luckily your grandparents were able to kind of get a steal, like so did Luis's friend. But also in Merced, I don't know if you guys know this, but like I remember I went to visit some like friends in Merced because they went to UC Merced, and they all lived in this like area with like basically new houses, and it's because they were building all those houses and then they stopped because of
Mm.
this thing. And
Mm,
since no
wow.
and all of them were foreclosed, and you couldn't even see there was like empty plots where they were going to build houses but they stopped because like yeah now no one could afford it, and all the houses that were still there, they're all getting rented out to college students. And I thought that was like so crazy because obviously us coming from San Francisco where we're like sharing a tiny like sharing
Yeah.
bedrooms or like have a smaller house and they're like old and a little run down, they've got these like brand new houses that they're just tearing apart, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? And I thought that was super crazy. Then as well, it's crazy how this affected us.
Yeah, and so even so the where my grandparents live, there was like this area on their street where there was like no homes or anything on there. I'm not sure if they stopped building homes there because of all this stuff that happened, but I know there wasn't any homes there. Well, actually, I know someone that the person that lived directly across from us, they owned like all that land that was surrounding them. I think that's what it is. But anyways, I think they had sold it to people who could start building homes there. And my grandparents said that they looked into how much those homes cost, and they were like crazy high, especially compared to like how my what my grandparents paid. And my grandparents' house is bigger than those people's house, and we have like a pool and all this stuff. And it's just like I was like, damn, I was like, they're paying way too much for those houses, and it's crazy. Okay, let me just finish. I have like a big
Oh, yeah,
My
answer
sorry.
bad.
paragraph left. Sorry. We got off topic. It's okay. Okay, so I think general greed on the parts of the banks, lenders, and investors created a blind spot for them. I think that's basically kind of what all of this boils down to. So I found an article that discusses it, I think, pretty well. The Big Short opens with an epigraph from Mark Twain. It ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. The implication is that the crisis was caused by cluelessness, not malice. That implication, which happens to be correct, which I'm like, okay, I don't know. Whatever. Like, don't make it seem like stock market people are have good hearts. Anyways, um, which happens to be correct, is reinforced in a later scene when a hedge fund manager, played by Steve Carell, explains to a stripper that she won't necessarily be able to refinance her 5 mortgages before the rates explode, even though her broker had told her everything would be fine. He's a liar, Carell says before reconsidering. Well, in this case, he's wrong. In other words, the guy was a sleaze for letting her finance 5 homes, but he probably truly believed the home prices would keep rising fast enough to help her avoid any problems. The story of the bubble was a story of unethical as well as unintelligent behavior, and there wasn't always a clear demarcation between fraud and idiocy. Tell me the difference between stupid and illegal, Gosling's character says. and I'll have my wife's brother arrested. But the story of the crisis is mostly a story about dumb, self-defeating mistakes. Yes, Wall Street runs on greed, and yes, big banks ripped off their clients, but ultimately Wall Street succumbed to the housing is bulletproof delusion, and many of those big banks lost their shit in the panic. Or shirt. I said shit, lost their shit in the it's shirt in the panic.
Both.
Which, I mean, but yeah, I was like, both are true. But yeah, I feel like that kind of really, I guess, describes it. Like, yeah, like all these people are in the wrong, but it's like they all had the idea that basically what they were doing wasn't going to result in this. So, IDK.
I think this is another case of America because I think this affected globally, but majorly in the U.S. Right. So I always say this all the time: we are reactive and not proactive, right? So people weren't actively looking at like, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say because if they really were ignorant towards this, like how can you be proactive towards it? But
Well,
yeah.
almost it seems like it, in a sense, it's like their willful ignorance because they're like, this is never going to happen. It's like,
Yeah.
like there's a chance of something happening like that. Like, I mean, not. I don't know. I just feel like people are like, because it's never happened means that it won't ever happen kind of thing. But it's like, that's not true. Just because it's never happened doesn't mean it's not possible that it could happen. And especially if you're with that idea that it's never going to happen, then you're just going to create
Yeah.
something that is, obviously is going to get over people's heads.
But they said that the way they started this type of like mortgage lending was years ago, right? And instead of changing it with how like society is changing, right? We're constantly changing instead of like making sure that is accurate to how we are changing. They just like kept it the same. So it's like, so anyways, it's like, it's kind of like how a lot of things are, I think, to this day, how we're like, okay, that's like so old school. Why are we still doing it like that? But I can't think of one right now, but I know that.
I don't know. I think overall though, it's the general just greed of bankers and shit. It just made me really hate all the people too that deal with all this or like do this for a living. I was like, you mother effers, all you care about is money. Not about the little guy who's just trying to make it by. And like that's the thing too that's crazy. Like that's what when I was watching the film, I was talking to Chase and I was like, that's like how the rich stay rich, obviously, is by keeping poor people poor. And then how they keep them poor is like they just take their money to make themselves rich and then leave nothing for them. They don't care what the end result is for that person. They just care how it's gonna benefit them. And I'm like, and that's sad.
Yeah, I mean, like even talking about like the GameStop thing that happened recently, it's like people were so mad because just random people were making money and it wasn't like staying within the hierarchy of rich people. It's like
That and then also I think what was it? Oh, you know how like they were basically, I think even in the film they were talking about how it's rigged and they kept saying like, oh, this is rigged, the system's rigged. And I was like, dude, I feel like even the whole thing with GameStop proves that it is rigged because didn't Robinhood stop it so people could
Yes.
trade? And it's because it wasn't the right people trading. It was people, your average Joe trading or trying to make something money from it. So it's like only certain people are allowed to do this, and that's just effed up.
Yeah, the Louis did like, okay, so I guess the CEO of Games or not GameStop, Robinhood tried to explain this, but he did a really poor job of it. And another person kind of explained it better. And the reason why he stopped people from purchasing GameStop stock was because people were purchasing it so fast that they couldn't keep up. So they just stopped it so that if let's say I went in and I bought some stock or some shares for
so they were doing what the mortgage loans were doing.
Yeah. So they were trying to, they essentially were like, let's stop it now before like it gets out of hand. But anyways, yeah, it was hella sketchy the way it was done. And then I was going to say like, yeah, it is hella scammy. And I think probably like Alec, you might talk about this is that I think the banks were just relying on like, is it the government to just bail them out?
Like how?
Yeah, probably.
So that's why they didn't give a shit because they were like, well, we're going to get bailed out. Like,
And it's so annoying too, because it's like, I mean, at the end of the film, how like, yeah, they're like, oh, they knew the whole time, like they knew this was gonna happen. They just didn't care because like you said, they knew that they're gonna get bailed out. And it's just like, why do rich people like keep like getting away with shit? Like it's so annoying. Like
So before I talk about like where the main peeps are today or as recently as I could find, I think I'm going to talk about pretty much, who was actually held accountable for the collapse and kind of what's going on now. And then I'll talk about our friends. So a lot of I probably this episode I don't want to say I did the most research, but I definitely spent the most time trying to figure it out, and even so I still feel like I have just like big blurbs from articles and stuff, because even me trying to summarize it, I'm just like, it's gonna get all confused.
Yeah. No, totally.
All right, so so who was held accountable? So this I found from The Atlantic, and this was a article from 2015. So since 2009, 49 financial institutions have paid various government entities and private plaintiffs nearly $190 billion in fines and settlements, according to an analysis by the investment bank Keefe, Bruyette, and Woods. That may seem like a big number, but the money has come from shareholders, not individual bankers. Settlements were levied on corporations, not specific employees, and paid out as corporate expenses, in some cases tax deductible ones. In early 2014, just weeks after Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, settled out of court with the Justice Department, the bank's board of directors gave him a 74% raise, bringing his salary to $20 million. The more meaningful number is how many Wall Street executives have gone to jail for playing a part in this crisis. As they mention at the end of the movie, only one person went to jail. So Kareem Sarah Geldin, a senior trader at Credit Suisse, is served a 30-month sentence for inflating the value of mortgage bonds in his trading portfolio, allowing them to appear more valuable than they really were. So one guy in only 30 months. How does that make you feel, Nicole?
Yeah, I just don't get it. Like, how does one person who did the same thing as so many other people, he's the only one that that's how my mind feels.
I'll try to explain it. So at an event at the National Press Club last February, Holder said the virtual absence of convictions or even prosecutions this time around did not result from want of trying. Quote, "These are the kinds of cases that people come to the Justice Department to make," he said. "The inability to make them, at least to this point, has not been as a result of lack of effort." Preet Bharara, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, made a similar argument. "The evidence," he said, "does not show clear misconduct by individuals. It's possible that Barara is correct about that. Wall Street bankers make it their daily business to figure out ways to abide by the letter of the law while violating its spirit. And to be sure, much of the behavior that led to the crisis involved recklessness and poor judgment, but not fraud. Even so, in light of various whistleblower allegations and the size of the settlements agreed to by the banks themselves, the Justice Department's ethos regarding Wall Street and the way the department went about its business appear to be a large part of the story. The Justice Department reached agreement with other Wall Street banks to resolve allegations that it knowingly sold faulty mortgage securities that contributed to the financial crisis. JP Morgan Chase paid $13 billion. So, and this is ongoing too. They're just paying the government these fines. And that's kind of what happened too with the bailout as well. Like, again, I always feel like I'm not a dumb person, but like I guess like because this happened with General Motors and everything like that. I feel like I was just kind of young when all this stuff happened. But with the government bailouts, I was just like, well, how does that really work? You know, because it's the taxpayers that are paying this money that the government is giving to these companies, but they are actually paying it back. And I guess the majority of these banks did pay everything that they got bailed out with and then some. So the government actually made like $12 billion or something on the bailouts of these banks. But yeah, that's pretty much what happened. I mean, the one guy, I guess, got caught because, I don't know, it sounds like he had it on paper or something, and it was the only evidence they could actually find. With every bank that they went through, they could not find one person to put the blame on. It was everybody kind of, like I said, just being reckless with it and being like, it's okay, it's going to be somebody else's problem type of a thing. It's fine, it's fine, it's fine. But it's like when you have so many people saying it's fine, it adds up, and then this happens. So that's why they kind of just came to agreements with these banks of, well, you're just going to pay these large fines then instead of all of these people going to jail, I guess. So, and they did. And then, from the Washington Post, this is I found there was a couple Washington Post articles that I read from 2018, which was, the 10-year anniversary of the crisis. And they said, is the financial system safer than it was before the crisis? Generally, economists agree that the financial system is safer. The 2010 Dodd-Frank Act put new guardrails around the banking sector. The country's biggest banks must now undergo periodic stress tests to prove that they could survive another crisis and draw up living wills so that they could be dismantled in an emergency without requiring a taxpayer bailout. But Congress and regulators have recently begun loosening some of the Dodd-Frank key requirements, allowing small and mid-sized banks to escape some of the most rigorous rules. For example, critics warn that such efforts could make another crisis more likely. Many holes in our financial regulatory system are now plugged, said Aaron Klein, a policy director at the Center of Regulation and Markets at the Brookings Institution. Are we impervious to another crisis? No. It's human nature. Cars are safer today than they were 30 years ago, but you can still get into an accident. So,
True.
yeah. So they did put a system into place, but
yeah, they can't predict a pandemic, right?
Yeah, exactly. I briefly was watching this video the other day before researching this, and they were talking about how another housing bubble could possibly burst soon-ish because of all of
when?
the
That's what I will buy.
Yeah. because of the pandemic, and so many people have been on a forbearance and stuff with their mortgage payments, and so now they're worried that something could happen once people need to start paying again and still cannot pay. So there's talks that it could possibly happen again, but I didn't look too far into it because that's scary.
Yeah, because in SF, right, they were saying people they don't have to pay their rent, and they won't get evicted, but they will have to pay it back eventually. And so I was like, no, that doesn't sound like a good idea.
Yeah,
because right, because we were all thinking if we really wanted to, maybe we could say oh, we can't afford rent this month, but then I was like, well, then next month we're gonna pay double, or when are we going to pay it back? I don't want to ever feel...
probably slowly upgrade it, or each month you have to pay a little bit extra than you
exactly. In the end, I'm not really saving anything, what I mean?
No.
It's so I'm just digging myself a hole. And so I understand that what you're talking about with the whole mortgage thing.
That happened to us too with our mortgage. Our bank came to us and they're like, hey, do you want forbearance for however many long you need? And we're like, sure, because this was the first month of the pandemic, and all of a sudden we're like, oh no, everything's shutting down. What are we going to do? I mean, JC, my husband, owned a brick and mortar, comic book store, and it's got to be closed now. And the 2 theme parks that my business is based off of are closed now. So we're like, okay, sure. So we did, take the month off or whatever. But then I realized when I looked into it, which again, if you don't look into it, you don't know, type of a thing, that of our options of, well, are you going to pay double your mortgage next month or however many months, like you were saying, and pay it back and then you'll be good, or they're going to draw it out over however long your mortgage is, or they'll tack it on to the end so your mortgage lasts forever. So I was like, okay, let's just not pay this 1 month, and then we'll just have them tack that 1 month onto the end, because I don't want to get too far into this. We can pay, we'll figure it out. Let's pay it and stay caught up, because the results are not good if you don't pay. So, but unfortunately, some people didn't have that option. So some people are going to be in that position.
But yeah, I think it's kind of crazy how this has affected where everything stands today, because we all said that in 2008, we were all at an age where we really remember and are actually seeing the effects of the housing crisis, right? So I remember at the time, they were always saying just everything was horrible. Because my dad, he was a college professor, so I would always meet his students, and he'd always introduce me to the ones that I don't want to say are doing well, but you know what I mean? Obviously if they're doing well in his class, they get along. And so I'd meet a lot of them, and it was really they were like my role models in a sense, because I'd be like inspired, like, oh, you guys are doing so great, and then next you guys are going to graduate and you're going to get this job. But then, you know, like I see them and they're struggling because, you know, they can't get a job, and then everyone's like losing their houses like that. I'm like 16 and I'm already learning what foreclosure means. Like, I feel like that's a little young to really understand foreclosure, right? And at school, like I remember schools getting affected. Like I remember constantly they were saying they were going to cut art programs, and I was a drama student. I was like, oh my god, please don't. Like, I did drama and I did video production, and you know, I was more on the I got a bachelor of arts. I always say like I'm an art person.
Yes, me too.
Yeah, I think we all did, right? We all got BAs.
Yeah.
So yeah, we so I always say like I need the
But you
arts.
guys were way more art.
I was gonna say I didn't even know that Nicole's degree was a Bachelor of Arts. That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, like I was terrified of them cutting all the art programs out of schools because they kept saying like they need to make budget cuts. And I remember my mom being pissed, like, why are they making budget cuts in educational programs? Like, make budget cuts somewhere else.
Yeah.
That, you know, like it was scary. And I hated the fact that like I was also in high school, I was in ASB. So they were constantly trying to like come up with fundraising ideas. Yet at the same time, whenever we would try to come up with fundraising ideas, they would get shot down because like we might need some money to get something like brought in or whatever. It was like the only thing we could really do to make any money, which was like I hated, was car washes. And I was like, sorry, I'm busy that day. But yeah, it was just and even my parents, like, you know, I felt like I couldn't even ask them for anything because they were trying to save as much money as they could, because in a couple years I'd be going off to college, and they helped pay for my college tuition and for my living expenses. So they were like concerned about paying for me, and then a couple years after that my sister. So it was crazy. And then I also heard that because of this is why the job market is actually difficult for us now. I don't know about you guys, but I'm you guys obviously most likely experience this as well, is that entry level jobs, they require some experience, and you're like, what the hell?
That's why I don't go for them.
But the reason why they say that is the people who lost their jobs then took entry level jobs, and now all of a sudden the standard is different because they're used to, or not used to, but they had to kind of like redo the standard because the entry level guy is now like smarter or like more, you know, more equipped to do this. So then they want to like, you know, just redo their standard of what's entry level. Now we're struggling getting entry level jobs, and it just sucks like that.
Is that why they pay like nothing for you to be entry level, and then but you have to have like masters, all this other bullshit,
yes,
all these user experience, but we'll pay you like $13.
Yeah,
like,
because
how did that make sense?
no, exactly, because people lost, like, let's say a VP lost his job, and so he now he applied for an entry level job. He is willing to take a lower pay because obviously, like, he just needs a job to support his family. But he used to be a VP, so he has all this experience and is able to do the job very well. And now all of a sudden companies are like, well, why are we hiring these, like, you know, fresh college grads who don't know anything, paying them as much as this guy who's doing so much better? And it essentially screwed it up for, you know, how our careers are supposed to advance. Like, I know growing up my whole life, it was go to college and then get a job. And it's supposed to be as simple as that. And because of this crisis, it has twisted and turned in a way.
And that's unfortunate because I feel like before, when I was like trying to find, like actually trying to find a job, I feel like
I love the way
well, like where I actually cared like what my like job title was or whatever. I feel like my family did not understand how difficult it was. Like they thought I wasn't trying, but I'm like, no, I'm trying. It's just not as easy as it once was for you, who you literally could just not even have a college degree and just find a job doing whatever you wanted. Like I was like, it's not that easy anymore. But like, I think some of them were just under the impression I wasn't even trying. But I'm like, no, I definitely am. It's just not as easy. Like I'm trying, but I also don't want to go back to school. I also don't want to go back to school to get my master's and have to pay even more debt back and then get paid the same amount that I'm getting paid now at my job that I have at the freaking store I work at. So it's like, what's the point?
Yeah. It that's like something I think like we don't realize how much it has affected in our life today, because when we think of just the housing crisis, we just strictly think it's just housing, it's just mortgages, it's just real estate. But the fact that it also affected our careers, like that's insane, you know?
I think at the end of the film too, they did mention that like I want to say 8 million people lost their jobs and like all these millions of people lost their homes and like all this stuff. So it's like, yeah, it definitely had more of an impact than just the housing.
Yeah,
It
I think it
affected
was,
much more.
did you guys have friends who lost their homes? Because I did.
No.
Oh,
I don't think so.
like I just remember I used to go to their houses, and they would have like this beautiful house, and then the next year they're all of a sudden like downgrade to like a smaller house, and obviously they didn't tell me like what happened. I just thought like, I didn't really think much of it, and then later my mom would be like, obviously, Lisa, they're foreclosed.
Alrighty, well, I guess we will finish on up with where are these men now?
Oh, I forgot he's not stuff to talk about.
We always do that.
finishing up.
It's all good. It's all good. So I got all this info, hilariously enough, from a People magazine article from 2016.
Hey.
And it had like the most comprehensive, like, where are they now situation. So, all right. So, Dr. Michael Burry. Dr. Burry remains CEO of the company he founded, Scion Asset Management, which is featured in the film. The seemingly prophetic figure is the only individual featured in Lewis's book and the film who allowed the filmmakers to use his real name. Regarding the ominous last frame of the film before the credits, which reads, Michael Burry is focusing all of his trading on one commodity, water. Burry says his position is not as foreboding as it sounds. Food is the way to invest in water, Burry told New York. That is, grow food in water-rich areas and transport it for sale in water-poor areas. This is the method for redistributing water that is least contentious, and ultimately it can be profitable, which will ensure that this redistribution is sustainable. A bottle of wine takes over 400 bottles of water to produce. The water embedded in food is what I found interesting. So we're still doing that. Steve Eisman, aka Mark Baum, played by Steve Carell. Hedge fund investor Eisman currently works alongside his parents, Elliot and Lillian Eisman, as managing director of the Eisman Group, an asset management group within larger financial consulting firm, the Neuberger Berman Group. In 2011, Eisman left the fund featured in the book and film Front Point after the co-portfolio manager of the firm's healthcare strategy was accused of insider trading. Eisman's current outlook on our financial future is not as grim as what Carell portrays in the film. He says, quote, if you read the newspapers, sometimes it feels like it could happen again. And from where I sit, that's just not true. Eisman told the Globe and the Mail. The regulators learned the hard way they were wrong, and they've done a lot to correct a lot of the problems. The banking system probably hasn't been this safe in my lifetime. Eisman also says that while he respects Carell's portrayal, it's not 100% accurate. Eliminate my sense of humor and make me angry all the time, and that's the portrayal.
I think Steve Carell did really good in this movie, though, too.
Yeah, he did. I know. I feel like, is this like the most like serious and angry I think I've ever seen Steve Carell?
I think there's another film where he's a wrestler coach.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I don't think I've seen that one.
I haven't seen it either, but I've heard about it.
Foxcatcher? Fox?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard that. When he first came on though, I thought of that cartoon that he is. With Minions and stuff. Despicable Me.
Oh, Despicable Me. That cartoon that he is.
Yeah.
Yeah, Gru.
Gru, yeah, because he has an accent, and he's kind of angry, So
yeah. Greg Lippman, aka Jared Vennett, played by Ryan Gosling. As he's portrayed in the film, Lippman was a top trader at Deutsche Bank, but left to start his own hedge fund, LibraMax Capital, in 2010, where he works as its chief investment officer. According to Bloomberg, the fund is focused on a range of complex debt securities and has reportedly been profitable since its inception. Lippman plans to launch a new fund next year, 2016. No word on what he thinks of Gosling's performance. Ben Hockett, aka Ben Rickert, played by Brad Pitt. True to Pitt's slightly paranoid, standoffish portrayal in the film, Hockett remains steadfastly off the grid. He has a home you can't access by car in case of Armageddon, Pitt told Vulture. I love that. Increasingly, the site of Hockett's final multi-million-dollar trade, the Powder Monkey pub in Exmouth area of Devon, England, has made headlines because the local establishment's reliable Wi-Fi played a major role in the book and the film. The pub staff had no idea about their crucial part in the tale until recently. He must have gone about his business quietly, as we have no way to distinguish him from any other customer in that period, one employee told the UK's Western Daily Press. It is quite a shock to hear about our part in the story, to be honest, but it's very exciting. And then the info that I was able to find about Charlie and Jamie is from a Bustle article in 2016. So Charles Ludley and Jamie Mai, or Charlie Geller and Jamie Shipley, played by Morgan Magaro and Finn Whitrock. After the crash of 2008, Ledley left Cornwall Capital, but has not left the world of finance. Instead, Ledley left Cornwall Capital in 2009 and joined Highfield's Capital Management in 2010, where he appears to still be working. Highfield's Capital Management is based in Boston and is described on its website as a value-oriented investment management firm which manages private investment funds for endowments, charitable and philanthropic foundations, pension funds, and other institutional and private investors.
Okay.
Wow. Sounds a little uppity to me, but okay. Mai, meanwhile, stayed with Cornwall Capital, where he serves as president. He's also listed on the board of directors at Keweenaw Land Association, a forest products and land management company. Both Ledley and Mai are listed as members of the board of directors for the Tobin Project, a kind of think tank that focuses on academic research. Ledley and Mai have stayed largely out of the limelight since the release of the movie. However, Magaro, the actor, revealed in an interview with Cinema Nerds that Ledley agreed to consult with him throughout filming and even visited the set. He says, quote, Charlie and I Skyped a few times. I'd ask him questions and he would answer. He came down to New Orleans when we were shooting to visit and we had dinner and he came to set. He was always open if there was anything I needed. Adding that Ledley approved of the finished film. As for Mai, it's unclear how involved he was in making the film. However, Whitrock hinted that the two had spoken about the events covered in The Big Short. Most notably, Whitrock told the New York Times, Mai gave the impression that he was deeply disheartened by the crash and remains disappointed that no one in the big banks was ever held accountable. He said, quote, my guy, his real name is Jamie Mai, said that he still has this sense of frustration that no one paid attention. They were screaming about this as loud as they could, but everyone turned a deaf ear. A lot of our guys didn't want to use their real names for this movie. We had to change their last names. I think they felt they were burned in the process of trying to get their voices heard.
One thing I wanted to mention before we started filming this, you know how we got that comment about like women and whatever don't need to be talking about history stuff? I'm like, damn, that guy's gonna be really pissed when we're talking about the stock market today.
Yeah.
I was like, damn, we're throwing another one at him.
Well, you know, I appreciate the feedback for maybe like where he's disappointed, like what specifically is the disappointment.
Us being women.
Oh,
Yeah, just us being women.
Yeah.
How dare we? But also, it's like, I dare anybody to freaking learn about the stock market. Like, geez
my
Louise.
God.
like after watching a movie about it. Yeah.
Especially when well, first of all, I have never been interested in learning about
Oh, man,
and
that
then
too.
yeah, and then just like also there's just a lot of different aspects to it. I feel like it's very nuanced.
Yeah, and as you said a million times, and as the movie says a million times, they do it on purpose.
Yep.
They don't want you to understand.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've been very, very interested in the stock market for quite some time because you know, people always say like if you have some spare money, you should always invest it. It's better to invest it than let it sit in your bank account. But I'm always like, but I don't understand, how do you invest it? Like what? And I'm still to this day like, I don't
Well, not
get
even
it,
that, but I feel like a lot of people, especially our age, don't have the luxury of having extra funds to
Oh,
invest.
for sure.
So it's like it's harder for people like our age and whatever to do stuff like that. But
Yeah. I wish I kind of looked more into their reaction to what happened with GameStop because a lot of it has to do with hedge funds and a lot of them are in the hedge fund business. So like Steve, you know, and he's all about like justice.
Yeah.
But I saw that there were like interviews and stuff like that. I just didn't have the time to go through it. And I already knew that whatever they said, I'd be like, huh? What?
Yeah, no,
Go
definitely.
down.
I can't remember if they say it at the end of the movie or if it was in something that I read. Maybe it was at the end of the movie. That whole thing where like Michael Burry really wanted to like get his story out there and tell them how he figured it out and nobody cared.
Yeah.
Which is so interesting.
Oh yeah.
It's just like, what? That is like that this guy is crazy smart. It's like
And then
I
they
know
like
how he figured it out.
they actually like investigated him too. Like,
oh yeah. Did we even maybe we didn't, I just didn't catch it. Did we define like what a short was and why this movie's called The Big Short?
No.
who wants to do the honors? Not me. Yeah.
Okay, so do you want me to read this thing real quick on
Yeah.
GameStop, specifically short squeeze? Okay. All right, so short selling and short squeezes. All right, this is what I found. Short selling is a finance practice in which an investor, known as the short seller, borrows shares and immediately sells them, hoping to buy them back later, covering at a lower price. Return the borrowed shares plus interest to the lender and profit off the difference. The practice carries an unlimited risk of losses because there's no inherent limit to how high a stock's price can rise. This is in contrast with taking a long position, simply owning stock, where the investor's loss is limited to the cost of their initial investment. Short sellers are exposed to a risk of short squeezing, which occurs when the shorted stock jumps in value due, for instance, to a sudden piece of favorable news. Short sellers are then forced to buy back the stock they had initially sold in an effort to keep their losses from mounting. Purchasing the stock to cover their short positions raises the price of the shorted stock, thus triggering more short sellers to cover their positions by buying the stock. This can result in a cascade of stock purchases and an even bigger jump of the share price. So does that
Yeah, I
make
don't
it?
get it. No, I don't get it.
No, okay, that made more sense to me, but
Yeah.
I was also the one
so
reading
basically
it.
you
they
would lose
have
me here and
money.
there, but I feel like I sort of get it.
Is the money they're losing the money that basically if they had owned the stocks that they sold or shorted or whatever?
So okay, here.
Like, because you know how like when people put money in the stock, how it raises the value, right? So the
Mhm.
money that they're shorting is basically the ones that they had already sold. Like, so like say like they had the stock at a certain price, right? So they sold the stock, and when you sell it, you get whatever money it was at that time. So
Mhm.
basically, is the money that they're losing the difference from that, from what they sold it for versus what it now is at? I guess that's what I'm.
Yes, I believe
Okay.
so. Yeah, because they're trying to cover, their
Okay.
purchases and everything, and then, but yeah, if it goes south,
And so, because if they're
then
trying
they
to
lose
repurchase
out
that, means they're
money.
trying to get in on the action again and trying to make whatever they had at the.
Mhm.
Okay, I think I kind of get it a little bit right now in this moment, but after this moment, it's probably gonna be gone from my head again. It's just, I think it's just because I'm just not into all of this stuff.
Yeah,
Like,
I could never be like into hedge fund or like day trading
hell
or
no.
things like that. Yeah, like when I look into investments or buying shares, I think of like what is the least risk. I mean, Alec knows last time I went gambling, I was like fucking having a panic attack the whole time, like losing $2,
Oh, I know.
So
I'm
like
terrible at it.
yeah, it's like, and it's this essentially kind of, I feel like it's that type of emotional roller coaster when you're looking at like the stock market and whatever stocks you bought from. So yeah, like I could never, like sometimes like Luis tries to get to, like he'll wake up in the morning, look at the stock market and stuff like that, and he'll like try to see like what's fallen, what's risen, all that stuff. But that's like a part of I think like Wall Street, how they do it with the day trading. They're like looking every single day, like where they can they buy? Like they're watching the
Yeah, and I think you're
trends and
trying to,
stuff.
yeah, I was like, you're trying to see trends of stuff and whatnot.
Yeah, there are like certain industries that people say you should like look that are like safe industries to look into. But yeah, like I try to get the ones I want to really look into are private companies, because when they go public, that's when their the price of their shares are going to be the lowest. But obviously, like you have to know if this company is going to do well. Like I think DoorDash
Jump on it.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like DoorDash, obviously, like I think they just went public last year. So, that's a company, obviously, it's like, oh shit, like I should have invested in that because like look at like look what's going on. Everybody using DoorDash, you know what I mean? So, but yeah, also I don't know the long term of that. So I don't know if in 20 years is still gonna be successful. I don't know, So
Yeah.
That's why they also
Gambling.
say like look into companies that the long term is going to be good. I always like bring up Disney because I always think like Disney's always going to be fine.
I mean,
But then I also really don't know. I
wrong.
don't watch the trends of Disney stock. It's confusing business, y'all. But I
Yeah.
will say that I do recommend if you ever in your life have some extra cash laying around, invest. For sure, invest. Because
Don't use Robinhood, apparently.
no, don't use Robinhood.
Apparently they're bad.
I feel like a lot of girls and ladies are the ones who get really, really confused, because every time I talk to somebody about stocks, it's like when I talk to like my fellow female, she's also as confused as I. But when I talk to my my comrade, my male comrade, they are like, blah, 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 blah. So I don't know if it's.
I mean, they're just looking into it more. That's because even Casey looks into it a lot more than I do. So of course he's going to know more about it than I do.
I feel like when I watch YouTube videos about it, it's all men. And I feel like, obviously I think that men know how to talk to other men, and like maybe like it's easier to follow their like their path that they're trying to go. You know what I'm trying to say? So when I'm like listening to them, I'm like, what? Wait, you lost me. But sometimes like we were talking about Raw Beauty Christie, how she can like talk really fast, but somehow we can like follow her. Like who knows? Maybe guys are listening to her and they're like, I've lost you. So sometimes I think like maybe it's geared towards men in that type of way, but I feel like we've got a lot of ladies listening, so that's why I want to be like, homegirl, if you got some money laying around, invest.
Well, maybe we should do some research on the side to find some like women investors and women, economists or something that people could go to learn more, because I'm sure there are some.
I'm sure there are. Thanks for joining us this week on the Internet Historians. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you check us out and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and give us a rating. And we would also love to connect with you, so make sure you follow us on Instagram and YouTube as well. Next week, we'll be discussing Selena Quintanilla from the movie Selena. So don't forget to tune in. Thanks again, and we will see you guys next week.
Bye.